Hello, my name is Williams and welcome back to True Crime Intel. Today I'm sharing one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing stories to ever come out of Indianapolis. A story of shattered dreams, unimaginable neglect, and a tragedy that no one should ever have to endure. This is the case of Chantell Gardner, also known by her stage name Chunny B, an aspiring rapper with big dreams whose choices led to the devastating loss of her innocent 2-year-old daughter, Skylar Gardner. Chantell Gardner wanted to make it big. On social media, she presented herself as a rising star, a hustler determined to break into the rap industry. Photos and videos showed her smiling, performing at local venues, and proudly posing with her children. To her fans and followers, she appeared to be a hardworking mom who was balancing the pressures of motherhood with the ambition of a blossoming music career. But behind the carefully curated posts and upbeat tracks lay a home that was far from the picture of success she portrayed. Chantell led a double life. While she was busy chasing her dreams at rap gigs and in recording studios, her 2 young children were left behind in an apartment that had become nothing short of a house of horrors. For months, Chantell left her children, 2-year-old Skylar and her 3-year-old brother, alone in an apartment that was unfit for living. Instead of nurturing them and providing the care they so desperately needed, she chose to spend most of her time at her boyfriend Brian Thomas's house, enjoying a more comfortable life away from the chaos at home. In her mind, a quick drop-off of some fast food was enough to sustain her children while she focused on her music and her personal life. But this neglect would soon take a horrifying toll. It was January the 25th, 2024, a day that would forever haunt everyone involved. On that cold winter day, Chantell made a frantic call to 911. Her voice trembled with panic as she cried, "My daughter's not breathing!" When the police and paramedics arrived at the address on Newberry Road in Indianapolis, they were confronted with a scene so shocking that it would be etched in their memories forever. Inside the apartment, the temperature was a frigid 46 degrees Fahrenheit, with no proper heating to fight the biting cold. The living space was filled with an overwhelming stench, a mix of decay, rotting food, and urine that clung to every surface. Walls were smeared with feces, furniture was coated in grime, and garbage lay scattered in every corner. The entire apartment was later deemed a biohazard, a place where neglect had reached its darkest extremes. In this unsanitary, heartless environment, the lifeless body of 2-year-old Skylar Gardner was found. She was discovered under a dresser, unresponsive and cold, her tiny body bearing the terrible marks of prolonged suffering. Skylar's frail skin was covered with bruises and even showed signs of rodent bites, a grim reminder that she had been left in an environment where even pests had free rein. The evidence told a story of weeks of starvation, hypothermia, and neglect. Her body was slowly shutting down under conditions that no child should ever endure. Her 3-year-old brother, the only other child in the apartment, was also found in distress. Though he survived, his condition was a painful testament to the abuse and neglect he had suffered. He was weak, trembling, and visibly frightened, his eyes reflecting a terror far too mature for a child of his age. The damage he had suffered was not only physical, the emotional scars would likely last a lifetime. When law enforcement arrived on that fateful day, detectives and child welfare investigators immediately began piecing together what had led to such a catastrophic failure of care. What they discovered was not an isolated incident, but a long pattern of neglect, a deliberate abandonment that stretched on for weeks, even months. Chantell's statements during police interviews only deepened the mystery. At first, she tried to claim that she had only left the children alone for a short period, saying it was just a day or two. But as questioning continued, her story shifted multiple times, and every change in her narrative raised more questions than it answered. How could a mother leave her children in such dangerous conditions and then later claim it was only a temporary situation? Chantell's actions spoke much louder than her words. The investigation revealed that while she pursued her music career as Chunny B and lived a life that appeared glamorous on the surface, she routinely abandoned her children in a freezing, filthy apartment. When she did check on them, she typically dropped off fast food, cheeseburgers, chicken nuggets, chips, and similar items, as if a bag of processed food could somehow substitute for the proper care and love that her young children needed. It became painfully clear that this minimal effort could never make up for the attention and nurturing that are essential for a child's well-being. As the investigation unfolded, another disturbing element came to light. Chantell's boyfriend, Brian Thomas, soon became a subject of scrutiny. Charged with assisting a criminal, Brian was accused of misleading investigators with his statements. In recorded jail calls and interviews, he was heard suggesting that he should have been the one to take the children in, or that Chantell should have simply brought them to his place instead. His words painted the picture of a man who was aware, at least to some degree, of the neglect that was occurring, but chose to ignore it. His inaction and silence made him just as complicit in this tragic neglect as Chantell herself. Medical examiners later confirmed what many had feared. Skylar's death was not a sudden, unforeseeable event. Instead, her body bore unmistakable signs of prolonged suffering. She had been exposed to the harsh cold for weeks, her body weakened by severe malnutrition and the toxic environment of the apartment. Hypothermia had set in, and her small body had slowly given up, unable to withstand the cumulative effects of neglect and abuse. Every mark on her skin, every bruise and rodent bite, told the tale of a child left to fend for herself in an environment that was deadly. News of the tragedy spread quickly throughout Indianapolis, igniting outrage and deep sorrow among community members. How could a mother, someone entrusted with the care of her own children, allow them to suffer so terribly? Many in the community began to question not only Chantell's actions, but also the failures of the systems that were supposed to protect these vulnerable lives. Neighbors recalled occasional sightings of the children through windows, little girl with haunted eyes, and a small boy who appeared too tired for his age. Yet despite these glimpses, no one fully grasped the extent of the neglect. Some expressed regret that they had not intervened or reported what they saw, a hesitation that now haunted the community as they struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Public outcry was immediate and intense. Social media erupted with comments, anger, and sorrow as people demanded answers and called for justice. Many individuals shared personal stories of neglect and abuse, urging everyone to be more vigilant and to step in when something doesn't seem right. The tragedy of Skylar Gardner became a rallying cry for better child welfare systems and stricter oversight of those responsible for caring for children. In the days following the discovery of Skylar's body, the legal process moved swiftly. Chantell Gardner was charged with neglect of a dependent resulting in death, a level 1 felony that carries a potential sentence of up to 40 years in prison. The charges focused on the fact that she knowingly placed her daughter in an environment where death was almost inevitable, even if she did not physically harm her with malicious intent. The court documents painted a clear picture of a mother who, in her pursuit of a music career and personal comfort, repeatedly abandoned her children in dangerous, inhumane conditions. At the same time, Brian Thomas faced charges for his role in the tragedy. Although he did not directly harm the children, his misleading statements and failure to act raised serious questions about his involvement. Many in the community and legal experts argued that his inaction made him equally responsible for the neglect that led to Skylar's death. Meanwhile, Skylar's father, who had been kept in the dark about the appalling living conditions, was left devastated. Barred from seeing his children, he was overwhelmed by a deep sense of loss and regret. His inability to protect his daughter only deepened the sorrow and anger felt by everyone following this case. As the investigation continued, more evidence emerged that revealed a long pattern of neglect. It became clear that this was not a single lapse in judgment, but a series of deliberate choices that allowed the conditions in the apartment to deteriorate over time. Chantell had been struggling for a long time, balancing her ambitions with the responsibilities of raising two very young children. Instead of seeking help or trying to improve their situation, she chose to isolate herself and let the living conditions worsen. In interviews, she admitted that she was aware of the problems at home. She confessed that the stench, the filth, and the overall state of neglect had become so overwhelming that she actively avoided spending time there. In one particularly painful revelation, she explained that she even stopped showering at home because she was embarrassed by the conditions. Rather than taking steps to fix the situation or asking for help, Chantell continued her double life as Chunny B, the glamorous, ambitious rapper, and the negligent mother.
They either dying from the shots or the shots to their veins. I know that pain of missing somebody that ain't coming back. Mama's burying their babies, it ain't no fun in that.
The more the investigation unfolded, the more it became apparent that this was not an isolated incident of oversight. It was a systematic failure, a long series of choices that repeatedly put the children in harm's way. The repeated pattern of abandoning the children, checking on them only once a day to drop off insufficient food, and then leaving them to face freezing temperatures in a filthy, hazardous environment all pointed to a deliberate indifference. Each day of neglect added to the suffering of Skylar and her brother, and each day the chances for intervention grew smaller. Let's take a moment to consider the toll this neglect took on the children. Skylar, at just 2 years old, was forced to endure conditions that no child should ever have to face. In that cold, unheated apartment, she was left alone to fight against starvation and the effects of prolonged exposure to the toxic environment. Her small body struggled, and despite her silent cries for help, no one came to her rescue. Her suffering was gradual and relentless. Over time, her body weakened, and ultimately, it could no longer endure the combined effects of hypothermia, malnutrition, and neglect. Her 3-year-old brother, though he survived the ordeal, was deeply scarred by the experience. Neighbors later described him as weak and trembling, a little boy who was constantly fearful of losing the little he had. The trauma he experienced in those dark days will likely affect him for the rest of his life, both physically and emotionally. His condition serves as a heartbreaking reminder that neglect does not simply vanish once the crisis is over. It leaves behind lasting wounds that can shape a child's future in profound and damaging ways. In the wake of this tragedy, many in the community began to ask hard questions. How did no one step in to help? Were the warning signs so subtle that neighbors truly did not notice? Or was it a case of collective inaction, a reluctance to interfere, perhaps out of fear or indifference? The tragedy of Skylar Gardner forces us all to confront uncomfortable truths about our responsibilities to protect the most vulnerable among us. It is a call to each and every one of us. If you see a child alone, appearing malnourished, or living in squalor, speak up. Even the smallest action, a simple call to a child protection hotline or a kind check-in with a neighbor, can make the difference between life and death. As the legal process continued, the trial of Chantell Gardner promised to be a turning point in this case. Prosecutors built a strong case not only against Chantell, but also against Brian Thomas for his role in facilitating, or at least ignoring, the neglect that led to this tragedy. The courtroom became the battleground where the facts were laid bare, a place where the truth about Chantell's deliberate abandonment and the systemic failures that allowed it to happen would finally be confronted. Chantell's defense might argue that she was simply overwhelmed, that the pressures of trying to make it in the rap industry while juggling motherhood were too great. But the evidence speaks for itself. The consistent pattern of neglect, the shifting stories during interviews, and the undeniable signs of prolonged abuse make it clear that this was a conscious decision. A decision to put personal ambition and comfort above the well-being of her own child. This case has sparked intense debate and a call for change among community members. Legal experts and child welfare advocates have repeatedly stressed that the outcome of this trial will send a powerful message about the importance of protecting children. The hope is that by holding Chantell and Brian accountable, the justice system will set a precedent that neglect, no matter how masked by personal struggle or ambition, will not be tolerated. Before I wrap up this story, I want to speak directly to you, our viewers. If you're watching this and you've been moved by the tragedy of Skylar Gardner, please do more than just let this story pass by. Hit the like button, subscribe to True Crime Intel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's use this platform to spark a conversation about how we, as a community, can better protect our children. Ask yourself, what will you do if you see a child in need? How will you respond when something doesn't seem right? Your voice and your actions can make all the difference. Every call to a child protection hotline, every word of concern you share could be the lifeline that saves a child's life. Skylar's story is a tragic reminder that silence and inaction have dire consequences. Reflecting on the lessons learned from this case, we must remember that the story of Chantell Gardner and the death of Skylar Gardner is a sobering lesson in the consequences of neglect. It shows us how dreams and ambitions, when placed above the basic needs of a child, can lead to devastating outcomes. Chantell's pursuit of a music career and her desire to create a glamorous image as Chunny B ultimately came at an unthinkable cost, a cost paid in the life of her own child. This case challenges us to rethink our priorities and reminds us of the importance of community vigilance. Had more eyes been open to the signs of neglect, perhaps intervention could have occurred before it was too late. As the trial unfolds, the focus will not only be on punishing those responsible, but also on addressing the systemic failures that allowed such neglect to persist. The decisions made in this case will impact how we view child welfare and the responsibilities we all share in protecting our community's most vulnerable members. It is up to each of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more proactive. I leave you with one final thought. What are we willing to do to protect our most vulnerable? As we honor Skylar's memory, let her tragic story be a guiding light, a reminder that every child deserves care, love, and protection. Her life, though tragically short, calls out for justice and change. It is our responsibility to ensure that no other child is left to suffer as Skylar did. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this detailed account of a case that has shaken Indianapolis to its core. Please, if this story has touched you, hit that like button, subscribe to True Crime Intel for more in-depth stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support not only helps raise awareness, but also serves as a powerful reminder that every one of us has the ability to make a difference.
This big shinny and them hoes do not like that. They think I'm Joy Mother, how I'm coming on that mic check. Don't take for me if ain't no take for me, and I know not check. Fuck this neck cause I'm the recipe, I'm really like that. I be out in my
Every action counts. Every voice matters. As we continue to follow the trial of Chantell Gardner, let us commit to being more vigilant, more compassionate, and more ready to speak up when we see a child in need. Remember, the story of Skylar Gardner is not just another case. It is a powerful lesson in the importance of caring for those who cannot protect themselves. I am Williams, and this has been True Crime Intel. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, be alert, and never hesitate to act when you see a need. Let's honor Skylar's memory by working together to create a community where no child is ever left behind or forgotten. In closing, I want you to remember that our collective efforts can help prevent another tragedy like this. If you see something that doesn't seem right, whether it's a child appearing alone, malnourished, or in an environment that seems unsafe, please speak up. Your concern could be the difference between life and death. Together, we can ensure that no other family endures the heartbreak that the community of Indianapolis now faces. Thank you again for joining me in this exploration of one of the most painful cases of neglect in recent memory. Please like, subscribe, and share this video to spread awareness. Let's use this tragic story as a call to action for a better, safer future for all our children. This is Williams from True Crime Intel, signing off. Stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and remember, the power to change lives is in our hands.